The idea that plants even can be talked about as being conscious. How do I get my head around this? They don't have brains for a start. So
that is a disadvantage.
Where does the consciousness come from?
Well, one of the interesting things is that you can get neuronal behaviors without neurons. And this has been demonstrated by a biologist I interviewed named Michael Pollan. But in the case of plants, there is this group of botanists, and I should say they're not mainstream. They're a little to the side. But they're doing really interesting experiments on plants to demonstrate that they have intelligence and possibly consciousness or sentience. Just a couple examples at random. Plants can see. What? Yes, we know they can tell the difference between light and shade, but even more than that, there are vines that can change their leaf form to mimic the leaf of the plant they're twining up. So how do they see that leaf form? How do they change themselves? There are plants that can hear. You play the sound of a caterpillar chomping on a leaf, and they will release toxins to those leaves to protect themselves.
They're aware of something like a caterpillar being nearby, basically.
Yes, yeah. And they also can hear the sound of water in a pipe, and roots will seek that.
That's fascinating.
It totally is. And they may have a form of echolocation like a bat. If you have a bean plant looking for a pole, we've all seen this in our gardens. They do this circular motion, this spiral. Darwin called it circumnutation. If you look at a video, a time lapse of that, the bean plant knows exactly where the pole is long before it touches it. So how does it know where it is? And you see that it's kind of casting itself like a fly fisherman toward the pole, straining to get there. And then when it gets there, you can see it kind of relax. Its leaves relax. It may be that it's bouncy. So every time a plant cell divides, as it grows, it does emit a little sound. And it may be that they can reflect that sound off of a pole and figure out where they are. Perhaps the spookiest thing I learned was that plants can be put out by the same anesthetics that put us out for surgery. Now, aren't they out all the time? No, they're just slow. They have behaviors. We exist in a different frame.
Someone's experimented this?
Oh, yeah. And so you can take a Venus flytrap, a plant with an obvious behavior, and you can put it in a bell jar with some xenon gas or one of these anesthetic chemicals that we use, and it will not respond when a fly crosses its threshold. So you have to ask yourself, what has the plant lost when it goes under anesthetic? We would say we've lost consciousness.
Yeah.
And some of these scientists say, well, this applies. If you have two states of being, one of them being conscious and one not, I don't think the word consciousness is right for plants, just because we have associations of a fully developed self, of self-consciousness, of, we're not just aware, we're aware that we're aware. And that's a level that plants don't have interiority, I don't think.
So this is going back to what you were saying earlier, sentience.
Yeah, that's why I'm more comfortable with that word.
So plants have a kind of sentience. It sounds like they have a form of intelligence, a body intelligence of some sort. That makes, for me, listening to all of this, all of it is kind of mind-blowing, but the idea that plants would have intelligence, not in this sort of human cognitive intelligence, thinking and reasoning, but just intelligence in the sense that they know...
Problem solving.
They have to solve problems, exactly.
Yeah.
They have to go towards light. They have to find nutrients. Calling that intelligence doesn't seem too much of a stretch to me. But sentient makes them seem a bit more living. They of course are living, but there's something more to them, more purposeful, I guess.
Yeah, purposeful. Well, we used to just say everything was instinct, right? Everything's programmed in the
chemistry
in your DNA, and the point of that this kind of biology is getting at is that the environment is so changeable that you can't program every eventuality, every contingency, and so that what evolution creates are problem-solving creatures in different niches, and they need the tools to respond to unexpected changes in the environment, and that's part of what's happening. Another experiment that demonstrates this is you can teach a plant. You can condition it, give it a lesson, and it will remember it for 28 days. And they do this with a plant called Mimosa pudica, or the sensitive plant. This is a tropical plant. When you touch it, it looks like a fern. When you touch it, all its leaves go, dead. It's like playing possum, so it won't get eaten. If you shake the container you have a mimosa in, initially it will think it's being touched and will react. If you do it enough times, it'll learn, oh, that's phony. I don't have to worry about that. And then for another month, it'll remember that. So it's
how is it storing that information? That's what I want to know.
Now that's a really interesting question, because we think you need neurons to store information.
Right.
But what has been discovered recently is that there are these bioelectric fields. There's a scientist I interviewed several times named Michael Pollan at Tufts, and he's really made a specialty of this. And that whenever you have a multicellular organism, what holds it together are these fields of electricity. And we knew about that there were these fields from the 30s, but it was only when we invented these voltage-sensitive dyes that we could see what they're doing. And these dyes react, they change color depending on how much voltage they're receiving. And you put this on you grow cells out in a petri dish, and you put this on it, and you see there's a lot of action going on. So what Pollan did was he works with planaria, which is a worm, a little worm that can regenerate any missing body part. He's very interested in regenerative medicine and how that works. And he teaches the planaria a simple lesson, which you can condition them. Then he chops off their head. They regrow their head, and they have the lesson has been retained. So the lesson was held in the body, not in the brain.
Not in the brain.
And so bioelectric fields can hold information. And that probably explains what's going on in the plants, because they have these fields. So, he would say neurons are overrated, that you can get neuronal behavior from any cell. It's just slower.
Well, I guess that sort of speaks to the idea that if information processing or computation is one of the sort of fundamental sort of things that life does, we are familiar with it from human points of view, and also in the artificial computation that we've created in physical computers. Sure. And things. But we do it through neurons and biological cells, but there's no reason why other bits of biology, other forms of biology wouldn't be able to do computation in their own way, which we don't recognize. And if we're not looking for it, we'll never find it anyway.
That's right. And we're so fixed on you do it with neurons.
Yeah.
And, that's one way to do it.
Since we're talking about plants having sentience and potentially going towards the direction of consciousness, which is already kind of 2 steps in the direction of me sort of having to sit down and think about it very hard. Can I keep pushing? If this is the case that we're understanding with plants, does that mean that plants could have feelings? Desires?
So whenever I start talking about this, people start wondering if
you
they
didn't say
can
no.
eat plants. The question that occurred to me is, do they feel pain? Because that's troubling. And is the scent of jasmine actually the scream of a plant that's being abused? And I talked to 2 different plant neurobiologists about this, and one said, yes, of course they feel pain, but we have to eat them. And then I asked someone else who said, no, pain would not be adaptive for a creature that can't move, and that pain is very useful when you can take your hand off the stove or run away from the source of pain. But since plants can't do this, they're aware they're being eaten, but it doesn't hurt them. That was reassuring. Because presumably a creature that feels pain, ever since Bentham, we've said, they deserve moral consideration. And what would be left to eat? Salt. I mean...
Well. Also, plants require being eaten to spread their seeds, right? In many cases,
yes. They produce seeds and fruits for that reason.
So it would be very maladaptive.
And they want us to eat those.
Yeah.
And also grasses, and that's a big base of our diet, right? Grain, rice, and wheat. Grasses are regenerated by being eaten. They co-evolve with the ruminants that eat them. So don't worry.
Your most famous phrase can stay in that case.
Stay in place.
Stay in place.
Eat food, not too much.
Yeah,
mostly plants.
Mostly plants. Yeah, exactly.
With a clear conscience.